you can hear me all right. Is that true?
Yeah, I would say it does sound slightly muffled, but it's not bad.
Okay. Okay. Well, that's good. Well, let's get started then. Let's see. Wendy, would you offer our prayer to start us, please?
Dear Father in heaven, we're thankful for the beautiful sunshine today. We're thankful for freedom of religion and a school where we are free to review history with the lens of the restored gospel, and we're grateful for the extra knowledge that that gives us and the extra protection it affords us, and we are grateful for the knowledge that we have, and ask that we be able to share that knowledge with others, and to teach others of Thee and Thy gospel, and to draw them closer to Thee. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Wendy. Okay. Well, today it's going to be another exciting class. It'll be about Maoism. We'll look at communism in China under Mao Zedong, 1921 to 1976. So, and we'll cover a broad swath of years, and we'll see lots of changes in China, but also we'll see a very familiar tune being played by the communists, even though the tune will have some variations under Mao and his special brand of communism. So here's the framing question to consider. How was Maoist communism in China different from Marxist, Leninist, and Stalinist communisms? As we go through our class today, if you could just think about that, by the end we'll circle back and then try to answer that question. Okay, well, if we look at the origin of communism in China, we go to 1921. A small group of intellectuals founded the Chinese Communist Party, and we'll talk about it throughout our slideshow today, as the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and began to subvert the Kuomintang nationalist government. And now this nationalist government had been founded by Sun Yat-sen in 1894 and then again in 1919 to overthrow the Qing dynasty, which would be China's last dynasty. So now we see a nationalist China emerging, and Sun Yat-sen being the father of this new nationalist, non-dynastic China. And this subversion of the CCP tried to do to the nationalist Kuomintang was ordered by Stalin, and he said, do it from within, which I think is very interesting. Well, in 1927, Chiang Kai-shek, who took control of the Kuomintang nationalists after Sun's death in 1925, responded by arresting and executing communists and labor leaders. Members of the CCP, including Mao Zedong, who would be born in, well, he was born in 1893 and then who died in 1976, the son of a farmer who had left home, become converted to the philosophies of Karl Marx, and then become a leader of the CCP in the early 1920s, fled to the mountains of Jiangxi in southeastern China. While in exile in Jiangxi, Mao began to formalize his brand of communism known as Maoism. Mao knew that non-industrialized China did not have the proletariat base upon which to create a pure Marxist revolution, but he knew that China was flooded with millions of peasants who accounted for 1/6 of the entire world's population at the time, many of whom lived hard lives. Consequently, Mao created a communism based on redistributing land from wealthier peasants to poorer peasants to catalyze a social revolution in China from the bottom up. Mao's use of peasants as the foundation for social change was a radical departure from pure Marxist-Leninist philosophy, which labeled peasants as backwards and ancillary, or of secondary importance, compared to industrial workers and their potential for global revolution. Thus, to court support from Stalin, Mao had to veil his brand of communism based on peasants instead of a proletariat in traditional communist rhetoric, which is interesting. If you read the documents from today, you saw that he really didn't emphasize the differences, he emphasized the similarities. 1934, and welcome, Heidi. How are you today?
Fine, thank you.
Oh, good. And can you hear everything all right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, great. I've heard I'm a little quiet or a little fuzzy today, and I'm not sure why. Tell me if this is better or worse. Okay, I'm just going to try a different thing with the phone. Okay, is this better, worse, or the same?
Better. For me.
Would we say better? Okay.
Yeah, it sounds better.
Great. We'll go with that then. Okay, excellent. Well, 1934, the Kuomintang. This is the nationalist Chinese government led by Chiang Kai-shek, whose wife was a Christian, and so he was trying to promote it was a corrupt but a democratic movement in China. But he pressured Mao's mountain retreat in Jiangxi and now decided to move the CCP's headquarters, and CCP for Heidi, that's the Chinese Communist Party, headquarters to the even more remote region of Shaanxi in northwestern China. The Long March, as the relocation came to be called, lasted 1 year and 6,000 miles and was harassed at every turn by the Kuomintang. 100,000 communists left Jiangxi and only 4,000 made it to Shaanxi. Once in Shaanxi, Mao strengthened his guerrilla forces, formed a government, and through an effective propaganda campaign promised social salvation to China's peasants. Meanwhile, Chiang's nationalist government raised taxes to crushing levels to continue the Sino-Japanese War, which, as we talked about, was 37 to 45. Following the defeat of Japan in World War II, the U.S. gave millions of dollars to Chiang's nationalist government to create a stable democratic state. Chiang used the money to prepare for a showdown with Mao's CCP, the communists, and built an army twice the size of the communist guerrilla forces. But between 1945 and 1949, the Kuomintang wasted their advantages by alienating China's massive peasant class through high taxation, immorality, and brutality, and printing so much paper money that it soon lost all of its value, which sent China's economy into a tailspin. The CCP, on the other hand, made up for its military disadvantages through radical land reforms that enriched peasants in Manchuria, fought off British ships sent to intimidate them, and won over the people with promises of a future of socialist prosperity for China's masses. In 1949, Chiang and the Kuomintang nationalists fled to the Chinese island of Taiwan, where they were protected by the U.S. Navy. On the 1st of October 1949, Mao proclaimed the founding of the People's Republic of China, the PRC, and was elected chairman. And Truman in the United States felt that he had lost China. Well, if we reason together then, and we go to that document in commemoration of the 28th anniversary of the Communist Party in China, which was 1949, according to Mao, what is the universally applicable truth upon which the new China is founded? And what internal and external goals does Mao have for the new nation?
Well, they thought that communism, didn't they think the new universal applicable truth was communism?
Yes, you got it. Excellent. Right on page 49, talking about Marxism-Leninism, which is that purist, idealistic form of communism. Yeah, excellent, Heidi. And so then what would be the goals then? These internal and external goals for the new nation. Also on page 49. And if you look there, the two paragraphs, the one has the numeral 1 and says internally, and then the second one is the 2, talks about external.
A revolution led by the working class, wasn't it?
Yeah, so he talks specifically about the masses, and so certainly, right, this working class, and it is really important to point out, because this is the complaint that Stalin and the Soviet Union always had against Mao. They really felt that he couldn't be considered a pure communist along the lines of pure Marxist-Leninist ideology because of his use of the peasant class as the foundation for his hoped-for communist society. But certainly, right, this working class, and then China, with the limited proletariat that it had, would also lump those all together with the masses, right? Whereas in the Soviet Union, the masses for them really would be, because they had industrialized in at least many of the cities, right, this proletariat or industrial working class. So here we have especially the peasant class along with the others who were working and in Maoist terms and in communist terms oppressed.
Yeah, I don't understand what...
And then what about the... Go ahead, what was that?
Wow, the problem with this new system...
What was that, Wendy?
The problem with this new audio system is that there's like a 10-second delay when you start to talk. But anyway, I don't understand.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't understand why the Russians thought that that was a big difference, because aren't the peasants just as poor in China, just as poor and oppressed as the workers in Russia? I mean, what is it a...
They were. But here's the thing. Marx didn't hypothesize that peasants would be able to rise up all around the world and be united enough behind the common interest of overthrowing the industrial capitalists for the stateless communism without classes to work. And so that's why really Marx, I mean, if you think about when he's writing in 1848, the Communist Manifesto along with Engels, it is a direct reaction to the Industrial Revolution. And so according to Marxist lines, and we're just talking about pure Marxist ideology, right, peasants were considered to be backward. They were not considered to be the revolutionary class because Marx didn't feel that they had the qualities that would allow them to create and to lead a worldwide revolution. But he did feel that there was enough class antagonism between industrial workers and industrial employers who Marx felt exploited the working class even more within the factories and within the capitalist industrial working world. That those people would have enough hatred and enough violence and enough energy to rise up and claim the world for the working class. But he didn't see that potential within the peasants for whatever reason. I mean, he was a materialist. He was focused on the Industrial Revolution, and he saw the greatest antagonism being between worker and employer in the industrialist setting. So that's why they would consider peasants to be outside the realm of the purist Marxists. Does that make sense?
A little, but is it mostly because he felt like industrial workers were not only poor and oppressed, but better educated, and so therefore better to advance the goals of a worldwide revolution? And if so, I don't really see those industrial workers that we talked about in our industrialism chapters. I don't see them as being very well educated. They seem to me just no better off than a peasant.
Right. Yeah. And certainly I can definitely agree. You know, and I think the interesting thing is here, you know, that's the way that the communists felt, and so they were always suspicious of Mao. But certainly, you know, if all of the oppressed peasants in the world rose up, you know, could there be a similar outcome as what Marx was hoping for if all of the workers rose up? And the answer is probably yes, if it could even happen. But what Marx thought, and I don't know if this is helpful or not, but what Marx thought is that because the world was headed towards a path of greater and greater and greater industrialization, he thought there would be less and less and less peasants to rise up in the future. And so because of that, he saw the industrialist worker as the revolutionary of the future and as the revolutionary for the future of the world. And so because of that, he just didn't feel that, you know, over the next couple hundred years, because that's the thing, he saw stages in his progression to worldwide revolution. He didn't think it would happen overnight. But considering the peasants, he thought that they would just die out and would be too weak a force globally within the next couple hundred years to do much. But he saw the world becoming increasingly industrialized, and so he always saw that there would be an oppressed class of industrial workers who would be able to rise up and maintain that revolution throughout the next couple hundred years.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and that's a great question. Well, if we look then on page 50, Mao has this sort of series of a claim and then a response to the claim. And so if you look at the claim that he makes, sort of maybe 2/3 of the way down, he says, the claim is that you are too dictatorial. How does he respond to that claim? And this says a lot about communism and about Mao.
We basically said absolutely we're dictatorial towards the reactionaries, which I assume are the nationalists that you were talking about. Is that right?
Yeah. So reactionaries, or once the nationalists, or once the nationalists were kicked out, any opposition or counter-revolutionaries, as Mao would call them. So those on the political spectrum who didn't want to turn to communism. And he felt that it would be for the country's own good, right, to kick them out, and that the masses and the peasants and those who were oppressed had the right. In fact, it was in China's best interest for them to be dictatorial because the other people were merely the oppressors, or they didn't understand that they would become the oppressors. Well, if we look at the utopian goal of Marxism, right, this sort of stateless society, right, years in the future, what does Mao say about abolishing state power?
He says, well, we need it for the time being because we still have imperialism here, and someday in the unknown future we'll get rid of the state.
Right, because somehow in sort of a backwards way, the state will strengthen the people, and then once the state-strengthened people are strong enough, then the people will be able to take control from the state and then run things themselves. Now, usually when the state gets bigger and bigger, it's not because it's empowering the people. So that's kind of the interesting paradox there.
Exactly.
But that was the whole. Well, if we look at those people then, right, who are the people to Mao?
The working class, the peasantry, the bourgeoisie, unless they're bureaucrats, and not the landlords, not the reactionaries.
Yeah, definitely. Excellent. Well, if we look at his formula then, what does he say on page 52? This is the second to last paragraph. What does he say is his formula or his main program?
The alliance of the workers and the peasants?
Okay, right, so there will be an alliance of workers and peasants. Excellent, right, and we'll have the people's democratic dictatorship under the leadership of this working class, right, based on that alliance. Right, and then it's interesting because not only will they get China under control, but then what's the next step?
To learn from the Soviet Union and to spread it abroad.
Right, definitely, right. They say the dictatorship must unite as one with the international revolutionary forces, right? So this is part of this global, right, working class revolution that in the end, they'll be able to join. They'll join with China, or they'll join with the Soviet Union. They'll join across the world, sort of, joining hands together and rising up and that sort of thing. Well, okay, if we look at this then, and we think about some of the claims that Mao has made, which of course are interesting claims, and we think about truth. Remember, because he said it was the new universal applicable truth, right? Look at this quote from Elder Scott, and how would you relate it? How would you relate what Mao is calling truth to real truth? What's the difference?
Well, I don't think the communists used either of these methods. I don't think science, in terms of social theory or any kinds of communistic experiments, would have borne out the fact that their idea would work. So the first thing they didn't use, and obviously they didn't ask God, so the second source of truth,
right,
which is the right one, wasn't used either.
Yeah, definitely, and that's a great observation, because if you think about it, as you said, it wasn't that they had tested it, or that this was some experiment, and they certainly didn't receive revelation about it, right? Because they're atheistic, and we think about that, and we're like, wow, how could he possibly claim? Well, this is truth, and we think about what truth really is, and I just absolutely love what Elder Scott said about going to the origin of all truth. Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Hello? Oh, okay, good. I just keep hearing some beeping, and I didn't know what that meant. But Caden, are you with us, my friend? Caden, can you hear us now? Hopefully you will.
Can you guys hear me?
You will be able.
I can't.
Oh
hear
yes,
anything.
now you're here. Great.
I'm just gonna mute myself. I'm gonna mute
Okay.
myself because I can't hear anything.
Oh, okay.
Let me figure this out real quick.
Okay.
I'll take that as a yes.
Well, it's also interesting too, because as we think about the use of this justification for the basically a pseudo-democratic dictatorship, which is this sort of social democratic dictatorship that Mao's talking about. How would this relate here to this wonderful quote from this talk by President Faust, Elder Faust at the time, the great imitator? Look at this quote, and then how does it relate?
Well, I just thought it was so interesting how Mao would actually just come out and say, yep, we are dictators. I have no problem with that. That's the only way to get things done, which is basically Satan's tactic, You guys aren't going to choose to do the right thing on your own, so I'm going to step in and do it for you.
Right. And certainly, I mean, isn't that one of the most commonplace philosophies of the 20th century, and perhaps you could say of all of world history, right? This sort of Satan-inspired plan of force, and I love how that's exactly what Elder Faust, President Faust, calls it, Satan's plan of force, right? So once again, he's not trying to mask it. I love how you pointed that out, Wendy. Anybody else? Yeah, I'm sorry that we sound so far away, Caden.
What the heck is a democratic dictatorship? That is, if that isn't ironic, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, no, well, I love it. I love it. Page 52, the People's Democratic Dictatorship under the leadership of the working class. Yes. But it really, sometimes I really do just scratch my head when I realize that people could actually believe this stuff, right? But they did, and yet maybe I shouldn't be so surprised, because look at this quote, right? Satan was persuasive enough to entice 1/3 of the host of heaven. Wow, right? Maybe I shouldn't be so surprised, even though it's that. Well, very interesting here, talking about where power really comes from. And it's interesting because Mao, is talking about, well, the people will be the source of power, right? And don't we hear the same thing, kind of, right? If we look at America's government, we the people being the source of sovereignty, popular sovereignty. People are the source of government. People are the masters of government, and not the other way around. But yet, when you hear Mao, obviously we don't quite feel the same way about what he's saying about the people being the source. So from the Divinely Inspired Constitution by Elder Oaks, right? What would you say, or your own understanding of the Constitution and America's principles of government? What would you say are the differences between Mao's people as the source of power and the United States' view of the people as the source of power?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is rule of law rather than just rule of men.
Mm-hmm.
there's actually some
Yeah.
laws in place, and everybody's supposed to abide by them, and it's organized, and it makes sense, and it's not off your passion and emotions. It's more off reason and law.
Yeah, I like that. Excellent. That's a great difference, right? But certainly between what we'll see in communist China and what we've seen when America has lived up to its promise. Anybody else?
Well, I just thought it was interesting how he says basically, yeah, the people will be in charge, but any of the people that don't really agree with us, like the reactionaries, will be, you know, beaten into submission and silenced and, you know, whatever else. And that's just not quite where the Constitution's coming from in the United States, that, you know, anyone who disagrees can just be quiet, kind of.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, right? And that is such a great difference that you pointed out, Christina, because and especially as we continue to look at the history today of Maoism in China, we'll see that really it's not really the people who are the source of power, right? It's Mao. And so when Mao decides that somebody's out of line, that's when they're purged, right? They're beaten up, they're killed, okay? They're rounded up in some way.
Well, I think
so
it's
really,
very interesting,
you know,
because, oh, sorry. I just think it's very interesting that it always seems to be the case that all of these different communist leaders are saying things in the name of the people. All of them seem to say, you know, if you're a follower or not, you know, if you're not a follower, we're going to get you. But really, they're the ones deciding that, and so the people really don't have any power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely. That's
Well,
a great point.
It seems to me, too,
go ahead,
that
please.
it seems to me that any of these leaders, at least any that I've seen and studied, they claim to, you know, be watching out for the people or you know, those that feel like they're oppressed or whatever, but they have never really been one of them. They always have a lot more money, and so it makes me wonder, is it really sincere, or is it really just a way to gain power? I still am not really clear on that.
Right. Yeah, and certainly, I think if we look at Satan, right, if all of these plans are inspired by Satan's plan, you could ask yourself, well, if we compare somebody like Mao or Stalin or Hitler or whoever, right, to Satan, well, what was Satan's objective? Right? Well, was he really doing it so that we could all be saved? What did he say? What was the catch?
That he wanted the glory.
Right. He wanted the glory. And so certainly you could say, wait, isn't it always that way? Right?
Well, that's what I
if
wonder.
These are Satan-inspired plans.
I wonder that. You know, to
Well,
me
sorry,
it seems that way. I said, well, that's what I wonder. Is it really about that person setting themselves on a pedestal and they want all people to look towards them as basically their savior? Of course we know that that's how it was with Satan, but is that really how it is with all world leaders that put themselves in this position? Are there any that are genuinely sincere and think that this somehow will really make life better for people? You know, maybe the answer is just no.
And certainly, you know, maybe there are some who think they do, but if you look at this quote from President Benson, I think it's very telling. He says here, right, okay, Satan works through human agents. We need only look to some of the ignoble characters in human history who were contemporary to the restoration of the gospel to discover fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy. I refer to the infamous founders of communism and others who follow in their tradition. So there he is saying that Satan works through human agents, and some of those are the infamous founders of communism and others who follow in their tradition, which I think is interesting and kind of answers your question perhaps in some ways.
Well, see, this is where I don't really understand. Are they just deceived? I mean, are people today who, you know, espouse communism, are they deceived, or do they, I don't know. See, I have a hard time with it. People seem genuine, but is it about, I don't know. I can only see that it looks like they're trying to gain power by using people. Is that always the case?
Sure. Well, certainly, I mean, I know that God knows people's hearts, but I don't, even though I wish I did sometimes. But I certainly know that Heavenly Father will understand those who were deceived and then those who truly were just power hungry and they were liars, right, and greedy. And certainly, you know, I couldn't judge. I could only guess. But I think that is a really great point that you make, Heidi, and a great question that you ask. Well, if we take a look then and look at what Mao did, to maybe learn a little bit more about him, because Heidi, you've asked about Mao, right? In a way. Well, let's look at him, and then we can make more of a judgment, perhaps. At first, Mao received counsel and arms from the Soviet Union, which treated the PRC as a younger brother in communism, and followed the Soviet lead in redistributing land to destroy the landlord class, focusing on heavy industrialization and creating a centralized bureaucracy. But never content to be an apprentice to the Soviets, Mao quickly infused China's communism with his unique philosophies about how to best and most quickly achieve a communist paradise. In focusing on the peasants, Mao stressed local community self-reliance through labor-intensive cooperative agriculture, rather than modern farming methods and technology in a collectivization effort for the state, which is what Stalin had done. He also instituted mass line leadership in which hand-picked intellectuals and guerrilla commanders disseminated and enforced at the local level throughout China's communities his economic and political policies. Over 1 million local branches of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, sent delegates to county and province committees, which reported to the Central Committee of over 100 members, the Politburo of 12 members, and eventually to a 6-man standing committee headed by Mao. By 1957, Mao believed that the Soviet Union no longer deserved to be the world leader of communist revolution. He believed that he should be heralded as the senior leader of the global communist movement since Stalin was dead. And he wanted China to progress more rapidly through socialism to communism and felt that the Soviet model of centralized planning was too slow. Mao believed that his philosophies and economic and social policies, which relied on China's hundreds of millions of peasants to transform the poor nation into a worldwide or a world industrial power by maximizing the potential of labor in village-level industries, notice the differences, right, would modernize China into a powerhouse that would, and this is according to Mao, right, surpass Great Britain in industrial production within 15 years. Well, in 58 and 59, Mao carried out his ideas in a massive program called the Great Leap Forward. So if we reason from the document the masses can do anything, right, let's answer these questions. What's the foundation of the Great Leap Forward? Explain the Great Leap as an economic program. What work still needs to be done to make the Great Leap a success? And then what's the role of the local communes predicted in implementing the Great Leap? What would you say? Any of those questions?
It sounded like they had been focusing on iron and steel production, and so now he's trying to revolutionize agriculture, but he doesn't, based on what you just read on the previous slide, it looks like he didn't want to use a lot of technology in that field.
Right, yeah, and certainly it wasn't going to be centralized, which is very interesting, the way that he proposes to go about this. That's a great point, Heidi. Wendy, excuse me. What else would we say? What work still needs to be done to get people on board with this Great Leap?
Well, it sounds like mass meetings. I just really had to laugh where it said, you know, we need to, sorry, but it really kind of reminded me of Obama and the healthcare plan where he said, I guess I just have not made myself clear enough. You know, I need to go and reason with people more. I just need to explain it to them better. That's kind of the feeling I got, especially where he said the methods still have not been made perfectly clear, because Obama's always saying, let me make myself perfectly clear.
Yeah. Right. Thank you. Thank you so much for that great tie-in to current events. I like that relating. Great. So certainly, right, there needs to be more education about this so that people can then do it, from their own hearts, so to speak, which is very interesting. Well, for the sake of time, let's take a look here. Mao talks about the masses so much. The masses this, the masses that, right? And so when he's talking about the masses, right, that made me think about Luke 15. And I really thought about these two parables that you can see here. We have the parable of the lost sheep and the parable, right, of the lost coin. And so how would we contrast these two parables with Mao's emphasis on mass society, mass movements, mass developments, on the masses?
Anytime you get a politician emphasizing human rights over individual rights, what that means down the road is that I have to take away your individual rights for the benefit of the masses, and they can twist that in any way they want.
Yeah, I like that.
Whether it's taking,
very,
tearing down your
very
house.
Insightful, Wendy. Thank you so much.
Oh, sorry. This system drives me crazy. There's like a 10-second lag. Anyway, I was saying they can tear your, whether it's eminent domain, they can tear down your house to build a mall or whatever. It's, your rights are, have to be superseded by the rights of the masses, or what's in the best interest of society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you so much for that. And certainly, I see that it's just so different with the way that Christ focused, right, on individuals, rather than just teaching to the masses and then going home, but visiting one by one with people and allowing them to get to know him in that way, caring about them enough to go after them, even the one. I mean, think of it. He had 99 sheep. Isn't that good enough, right? No, it wasn't to him, because that one was numbered. That one was named. That one was known to him and of great worth, as we are, as individuals. And I'm grateful for that. It's interesting here. At the same time, you could say, certainly, as Mao is trying to rally the nation, right, this huge nation of China behind him, he's basically saying, hey, the masses can do anything. If we all work together, right, we can accomplish a lot. And so it made me think a little bit about President Uchtdorf, talking about lift where you stand. And certainly, I'm sure, as we think about it, there are times where if the family's gardening, it's certainly helpful to have all, 6 members of the family, or 4 members of the family, or 8 members of the family, whatever, helping out, right, than it is to just try to do it all yourself. And so I think there's also that interesting concept that Mao is trying to tie into, saying that, yeah, together we can do anything, right? And so that tugs on people's heartstrings, right, when you start to bring in that kind of logic. Well, I thought it was very interesting here because he starts to talk about local, and you'll understand a little bit more about what I mean when I talk about the communes on the next slide. But he's basically saying, let's do this at the local level. If we could just get the masses at the local level to buy into this great leap forward, right, we can then become a great success. But how is that different than the faith principle number 6, how the seed of local self-government is planted?
Well, one of the big obvious difference is that this is based on God's law.
Right. That's a huge difference, right? And so when we're talking about planting that seed, right, well, if that seed is going to grow and bring forth righteous fruit, well, certainly we need to look at what kind of a seed is it. And as Heidi pointed out, right, here we're talking about a Christian seed, right, as opposed to a communist seed, right, or a Maoist seed. Anything else? Because certainly, as you'll see, now it's really trying to play this local card. And that's one of the great differences between Soviet socialism, communism, and then Maoism.
It kind of reminds me of oh, sorry, go ahead. Can you guys hear me? Because
Yes.
I can hear you guys now, too.
Oh, good.
I know, but this is where I usually... I'm sorry. Never mind. I can't be involved because there's other kids in the room.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Caden. I'm sure you would have had a great comment. I'm sure you have one that we would have benefited by. But I understand. Well, let's take a look at this then. Maybe this will help. If we look at this great leap in how Mao tried to substitute, right, this huge centralized bureaucratic state with his commune, okay? These communes became local centers of political and economic activity throughout rural China. The communes amalgamated, right, put together smaller collectives which further removed peasants from ownership of the means of production, interestingly enough, established schools and hospitals, and encouraged every peasant to utilize his own backyard steel furnace to boost China's production from the bottom up. This isn't top-down, centralized, mass-planned industrialization. This is very different, even though it's still industrialization. Peasant men undertook large public works projects, while peasant women did most of the field work. Well, long story short, despite singing songs with words such as communism is heaven, the commune is the ladder, if we build the ladder, we can climb the heights. And despite claims of 1,000% and 10,000% increases in agricultural production, peasants soon realized that the Great Leap was actually a great failure. It hurt China's economy, failed to bring the nation closer to becoming a communist paradise, and further alienated the Soviet Union, which reneged on a promise to provide China with nuclear weapons, and which pulled all technical advisors out of China in 1960. Mao publicly denounced Nikita Khrushchev, leader of the USSR, and prepared for a Soviet invasion. Well, if we take a look then at the next great social program that Mao tried, the Cultural Revolution, this will be very interesting to us, I would imagine. Mao continued to reject the Soviet emphasis on external to internal and transitioning from socialism to communism. And in 1966, he instituted a radical national program of cultural reform intended to help the masses transform China from the bottom up, one individual at a time. Of course, this is according to Mao. Right? He called the program the Cultural Revolution and ordered the mass mobilization of Chinese youths into Red Guard units to lead it by physically attacking and purging teachers, Chinese Communist Party officials, artists, and intellectuals who were at odds with Maoism, and by promoting a re-education in Maoist principles and a recommitment to communist revolution among the rising generation. Also, a rejuvenation of small-scale industries resulted in record levels of industrial and agricultural production in China. So if we look at the Cultural Revolution, you read this very interesting speech at a meeting of the Cultural Revolution group of the Central Committee. All right, how does Mao intend for the Cultural Revolution to be internal to external, according to him, of course? What are Mao's methods for re-educating the masses? What are his methods for silencing opposition? What do big character posters seem to be? How are they used? What role does violence play in the Cultural Revolution? Go ahead, answer any question from your reasoning.
I remember seeing a documentary on this, and it seems to me that this whole thing came into play right after Mao said that there had been a period of openness where he encouraged dissenting voices to speak out and say what problems they had with communism and to make suggestions for how to better things. So he allowed this period of openness, and I'm thinking it was just slightly before this, and then all of a sudden, as soon as they'd come out in the open, anybody who had any suggestions, then he started encouraging teenagers and college students to attack them and stone them, and there was all this propaganda going on, all this violence. Am I right about the timing of that?
Yeah, exactly right. And in fact, and if you read kind of between the lines, one of the reasons why he even allowed some of the dissension or the dissenting voices, because he wanted to create this condition that he called the struggle, right? Because the struggle would make China's new revolutionary generation strong, right? And the struggle would be, as you said, after somebody expressed their views, well, then let's go fight against them. And he actually encouraged this violence between groups, right, to make China tougher and stronger along the lines that he wanted, right? So it's almost sort of like a booby trap, right? Yeah. Okay.
Well, and he didn't have to be the one who it was internal to external, because he didn't have to be the one who was stoning anyone. He just got the college students and the high school students to do it.
Right. And so that's why, of course, we would say, well, it's not really internal to external, right? But in his mind, if you re-educate the people, if you re-educate the youth, through these Red Guard units and at the elementary school level and, purging any teachers who aren't with the program, then the people will sort of, this, talk about a twist of a true quote, by Joseph Smith, paraphrasing, teach them correct principles, they govern themselves, right? Well, he's basically saying if you just teach them correct principles of Maoism, then they will be able to govern themselves in this new cultural revolution. Now, of course, we see some differences there. What else would we say?
I have to be quiet, but can you guys hear me? If I'm like this?
Yeah.
Okay, good. All right. On the big character posters thing, I think it's interesting because I think people tend to follow what they can see. And I remember during the elections in 2008, you'd see all these things on TV about Barack Obama and everything, but then you wouldn't really see as much with Chuck Baldwin or Ron Paul or anyone else. They just kind of focused on the candidate that maybe I don't know, a conspiracy wanted or something, because all you would see was either Barack Obama or McCain, and it's just, I think it's interesting because so Mao used these big character posters, and these are what the people saw, and so it maybe they use these kind of leaders use these images. They give themselves a big powerful image to make themselves look like, I am your Messiah, I'm your savior, follow me. So that's just a thought that I had. Could you guys hear me?
Thanks so much, Caden. Appreciate that. Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes, thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, very, very, very interesting as we look at this here. And certainly we see these re-education efforts, basically talking about education will change society. These posters announcing by name dissenters, those who he called revisionists and capitalist voters, those in any opposition. Right? He's filtering, he's controlling the media and the ideas as well as art, right, to control the minds, right, and the hearts, as he would say. Interesting, basically replacing traditional texts with quotations from himself. Well, certainly an interesting time. If we look at this here, obviously, what are the differences then between the face principle of internal to external, or self-government, and the type of quote-unquote self-government or internal to external that Mao was talking about? What would we say? It's a similar method, but yet very, very different in the way, in the foundation.
I thought this is really cool because Heidi and I just last night were at the last Israel lecture with Richard Holtzapfel, and he'd just come home from China and Japan. He says, Japan is an open society, and we'd walk by the magazine racks, and it was just porn everywhere. It was just horrible, and that's what we have unfortunately in an open society. Then he goes to China, a total communistic country, and he says there was nothing on the magazine racks that was the least bit offensive. But then he made the point that when East Germany, was under totalitarianism, they didn't have drug problems and porn problems until they became an open society. But the point he was making was that the youth, they weren't internally, their hearts hadn't been internally changed. They didn't have the drug problems and the porn problems while their government kept it from them, but as soon as it opened, they turned to it because their hearts hadn't been internal, that the change hadn't been internally driven, it was externally driven. So it didn't look like they had a problem, but as soon as they got exposed to it, they had the problem. So he was just making the point how change has to come internally, otherwise it's not real change.
Yeah, excellent. What a great comment, Wendy. Thank you so much for that. That's a great example from real life. Well, certainly, we know the importance of education and true principles, right? That's why we're here. Certainly religious freedom, very, very interesting to look at Elder Oaks talking about religious freedom and how just like Mao tried to intimidate anybody who thought differently, you could say that perhaps in some ways there's a cultural revolution going on today to try to intimidate, right, and harass and belittle and eradicate those Christian influences that would challenge the status quo of the new morality or lack of morality and the new moral relativism that is sweeping and the secularist religion that is sweeping the country. Very, very interesting to look at these connections. Well, certainly if we then take a look at really what the result was of all of this, well, the effectiveness of the Red Guards at purging deviance almost destroyed the Communist Party and sent China into a civil war that resulted in a period of military terror that saw the torture and execution of thousands of people. This is where the revolution led. In 1968, Mao disbanded the Red Guard and sent them to work in the countryside. The Cultural Revolution had been a failure of massive proportions. Seeing the PRC as the counterweight to the UN, and this is so interesting. Right, seeing the People's Republic of China as a counterweight to the Soviet Union, however, the U.S. actually improved relations with China during the 60s and early 70s. In 1971, the U.S. dropped its objections to the PRC taking the Republic of China, that's Chiang's Kuomintang government, right, place on the UN Security Council, and that year the PRC took the ROC's place in the UN. 1972, President Richard Nixon visited Mao in Beijing and announced the new plan of cooperation between the U.S. and the PRC. 1976, Mao died, which would lead to the gradual opening under Deng Xiaoping of China's economy, government, and culture along Western line individual choice and individual property. Of course, it still has a long way to go, right, as Wendy pointed out, right? Change wouldn't come fast enough, however, as the tragedy at Tiananmen Square would demonstrate in 1989. And we'll talk about Tiananmen Square another day, and also China's growth and change after Mao died. But if we go back to our original question then, right, how was Maoist communism in China different from Marxism, Leninism, and then Stalinism, these other forms of communism? And certainly you can relate them to this wonderful quote, "Behold, it is he, Satan, who is the author of all sin, and behold, he doth carry on his works of darkness and secret murder, and doth hand down their plots, and their oaths, and their covenants, and their plans of awful wickedness, from generation to generation, according as he can get hold upon the hearts of the children of men." So what would we say then to wrap up here, comparing and contrasting and then relating it to this quote?
Well, it's different in your first question in the way that it focused on peasants instead of industrial workers and encouraged small little communes instead of huge state-driven collectivist effort. Those are some of the differences.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent, right? And then how would we relate them to this quote? Because I just think it's so important that even though we're talking about communism of different stripes, right, really what are we still talking about?
Well, we're still talking about agency, regardless of how it's taken away.
Yeah, excellent. I love that, Heidi. Well said, right? We're still talking about agency regardless of how it's taken away. And certainly, right, isn't the taking away of agency exactly what Satan wants? And doesn't he do it in different ways, but really with the same objective from generation to generation, right? And how? According as he can get hold upon the hearts of the children of men, right? Think about what Mao was going for, the hearts, right? Re-education, cultural revolution. Very, very interesting to see that even though the names of the isms may change, the names of the leaders may change, really, we still see the father of lies, the great imitator behind it all. Well, thanks so much for a great class today. I hope you found learning about Maoism in China interesting. Tomorrow we'll have another great class. We'll be looking at Cold War containment during the early 1950s. We'll talk about Korea and Iran, Cold War paranoia and McCarthyism. It should be really great. Once again, thank you so much for all your great comments. I really appreciate your participation every day, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Welcome. Bye.